Now it really gets serious. Even though these two teams are not rivals, natural rivals, things have been brewing through the years, and this has always produced a tremendous football game. And it's the Big Ten opener, and two really good teams on the field in Happy Valley on Saturday night on CBS. Iowa Hawkeyes live right here at the Voice of College Football. You know that we are talking about a date with Penn State, a much hyped team in terms of Big Ten championship contender, college football playoff contender as well. Corey Brad is here, of course, from the Hawkeye of the Storm. Get on over there to From the Hawkeye of the Storm for all your prep for the major matchup against Penn State. Corey, how are you?
Doing good, Mark. I'm excited for the week ahead. We're getting some much needed rain today in central Iowa, which is good for probably not good for the farmers, I guess, because a lot of the farmers are a little too late. But as it relates to football, it feels more like fall than it has, and the mornings are crisp. We're going to have a whiteout on Saturday. We get night games for the next 2 weeks. How about that? We got a little bit of a change to the schedule. Remember, there was initially reports that Michigan State would be Peacock on the last day of September. Now that's going to be an NBC game. So Iowa fans get a little bit of a pat on the back there, I guess. It sounds like maybe there will be another game later on NBC or on Peacock. But anyways, I digress. Penn State's a fun one. And I know Stephen Light in the chat's going to be, he's pumped up about it. And I want to make something clear. I had somebody reach out to me. Was it yes? No, it was this morning. Reached out to me this morning, said that he listened to a show of yours, I believe it was yesterday, and he wanted to make sure he clarified something, or that I clarified something. He says you had a media guy on from Penn State, and that media guy was talking about how Iowa coaches and fans were mocking players that went down with serious injuries during the 2021 season. And this viewer said what was not said to clear things up were the number of Penn State players that went down after Iowa had a chunk play just to come back in a couple of plays later. If you could bring that up to clean the air and the situation, I would appreciate it. So that is a fair point. I mean, I can't speak for every fan or every staff member on that coach. I don't know anybody that was mocking injuries in 2021. That's not what we do. It's not what I do. It's not what Kirk does. He's never. If Penn State fans took offense to that, which I know they did, and it's going to be, I'm sure it's going to get brought up. It got brought up today at the press conference with Kirk. Fine. That's fine. But go back to 2 years ago and watch that game in Kinnick. There were some very odd stoppages, play stoppages, clock stoppages, I guess you could say, as it relates to injuries. And what has the NCAA done? What has the governing body of college football done to stop that from happening? There was talk after that season about trying to limit that, but really they've not done anything. So I can just tell you the data, the facts. If you want to go back and watch a video that's 2 years old, I actually went through the players that went down during that game and when they returned. And most of them, with the exception, I think, being one, I'd have to go back and look to see who that was. Most of them returned shortly thereafter. And there is something to be said for, having interruptions when your offense is out there, especially an offense that wasn't very good in Iowa. If you're finally getting some momentum and you get these interruptions, that is a factor.
Yeah, so this is not really anything, although I do remember that incident or those series of incidents, and I remember something certainly more so from this side of the aisle because of our show here than the Penn State side. And yeah, our guy Marty Leap, who's going to join us a little bit later from Penn State Rivals, he is the same guy that joined us on the Big Ten Live show. And I just brought up there being some type of antagonism between the two sides, two fan bases, and so forth. And Marty went on to explain the Penn State side of things, and I was not prepared in any such way to take up one side or the other. I watched the game, but you probably remember that it didn't necessarily resonate with me because I didn't have focus locked in on it. And but as you just outlined, you took the situation to task and did your due diligence to follow it through.
Well, I'll say this. That again, it got brought up today to Kirk. Kirk kind of downplayed it. I have no doubt. I don't care if they're 2 years removed from that or not. I wouldn't be surprised if James Franklin brings up the comment that Kirk made after the game that I guess the fan base smelled a rat. That kind of went viral. Kirk had a couple of years there between 2020 and 2021 where he had some pretty viral zingers that made it out there. So this is always a fun game, Mark. I mean, like, it's almost always close. Now, I say that with a grain of salt because this Penn State team is really good, and it's really hard to play at Penn State. It's really hard to play in a whiteout at Penn State. But I think back, I think my memory as far as like the last 10 to 15 years watching this series, I mean, I'd say three without even tracking it. And I could go back and do that, but I'd say 75 to 80% of these games are close. 2008 was real close. Iowa wins on a final kick. 2009, they get the block punt from Claiborne in Happy Valley. 2010, they beat them in Kinnick. 2012, they lost at Kinnick, a home game. Iowa had some hype that year, and the season just collapsed. They went 4-8, got killed. So that was, there's an example of one they lost. I don't know about 2011, but obviously then I think they went several years without playing them. 2016, they got killed at Penn State, came back the next week, beat Michigan in Kinnick, that big upset behind C.J. Beathard and Akram Wadley. But then in 2018, it was close. That was in Happy Valley. That was a rainy game. Nate Stanley, Noah Fant, T.J. Hawkinson, those guys had a chance late. Geno Stone had a pick six late, Pennsylvania native, and they lost. 2019 was a home game. They had a chance late, but never really felt like they were going to win that game, but they kept it close behind a circus catch from Brandon Smith. And then, of course, 2020, they won there. 2021, they won here. So it's been a close series.
Did you miss the 2017 game down to the last second on the clock?
2017 game with Sean Clifford, Saquon.
Yeah.
That was the Saquon versus Josie matchup. And that when I went back and relived some of that the other day, I was a heck of a game.
Yeah,
and I made a comment the other day, they were both 3-0. It was the exact same game in the schedule. They were both 3-0 that year. That game, the difference was it was a night game at Kinnick, and it lived up to the hype.
Yeah, that Penn State team finished in the close to the top 5 in the country, won a Fiesta Bowl.
Yeah, and part of that's, I mean, I go back. I know it's funny. Ever since I made a comment about how I think Iowa seems just my hunch is that Iowa plays better at home at night. I've had some viewers, one specifically named Austin. I don't know Austin's last name, but he's jumped on my post-game show a couple of times, Mark. And I could even send you I'll have to forward these emails to you. He's actually went through the data and has all the data from how Iowa's played against top 25 teams at home, top 25 teams at home at night, top 25 teams on the road and on the road at night. And the data is not a real strong indicator that they do play better at home at night, which I guess is a good thing for this Saturday, because maybe that's an indication that they have just as good of a shot if it was at home. I have a hard time believing that because a whiteout is insane. I'll tell you the last time I think 2016 was a whiteout. Maybe Marty, when he jumps on here, can tell us. But 2009, that's really the one that stands out because, and Kirk brings it up every time he talks about this series. You probably remember that game as well as 14 years ago, Mark. But first play from scrimmage, Penn State goes like 75 yards. Darrell Clark down to, I don't know who the receiver was, on a busted play. And they strike gold on the first play from scrimmage. And that crowd is just absolutely insane. And so that's one thing that I kind of came to that realization today. If you're an Iowa fan, here's one strong reason to feel good. Not saying they're going to win, but strong reason to feel good is the fact that Iowa gave up several big plays on Saturday. And you may say, well, that doesn't make any sense, Corey. That's an indication that's a reason to feel bad. They're not going to give up those plays this coming Saturday. I think that's a wake-up call. I don't care who it's against. They came out in the second half on Saturday, allowed just 35 yards to a bad Western Michigan team. But I would say there's a good chance those mistakes are not replicated this weekend. So that's why I would say it was good that they gave up those big pass plays in the first half Saturday.
Folks, we take your comments and questions. Of course, the super chats stand out, so we get to those first, and then we don't guarantee we take every comment and question, but we appreciate when you do. send those in. We got Marty Leap here from Penn State Rivals to join the conversation and break this one down, because this is a huge one right out of the gate in the Big Ten. Marty, how you doing today? Hey, Marty, can you hear us?
My bad. I was still muted.
There we are.
I can't hear you. But no, I'm doing good. I'm doing good.
Appreciate you being here for a second consecutive day. So Marty joined us on the Big Ten Live show yesterday. So Marty, appreciate you coming back. I will get the conversation started, and then it might be best if I get out of the way, because I got two very knowledgeable guys that can mix up a series that, again, I was racking my brain for cross-sectional games in the Big Ten. Michigan, Minnesota, that is a rivalry, regardless of how good or bad the series is. Ohio State, Illinois, some old timers might say it's a rivalry. It's very one-sided, but they play for a trophy, blah, blah, blah. This has been the best game that I can come up with between one division foe going west-east, a matchup that I can think of, because, yeah, the other ones would involve automatically on the eastern side, Ohio State and Michigan. And certainly Ohio State has not had this kind of a series in regards to being pushed at all in the West. So this has been quite the series, Marty.
Yeah, this Penn State Iowa series has been about as good as any in the country, really, for quite a while. I mean, you go back even to 2008 when a trip to Kinnick kept Penn State out of the national championship game. It's always back and forth. I mean, Corey, I know before I hopped on, I was in the waiting room, you mentioned some of the more lopsided games. The 2020, the COVID year, when Iowa came to Happy Valley and kind of curb stomped them. I think we both agree anything about COVID year you can throw out. But, 2016, Penn State, the last time Iowa played at Happy Valley under the lights, just really stuck it to them. So we'll see how it goes. I definitely don't expect that Saturday night. These are two really good football teams, and just Iowa, by their nature, is very difficult to blow out, because they are a team that, with Phil Parker, is always going to play great defense. Their offense is going to slow it down, shorten the game, shorten possessions. But yeah, Mark, I totally agree. Penn State doesn't, and some of it's just because of when they came into the conference compared to these teams who've been there forever, has never really had that true natural rival in the Big Ten. But I would argue, in some ways, it's Iowa, because they're two teams that, since Penn State's joined the Big Ten, they're 11-11 against each other. They're always two good teams. They're usually in the upper echelon of the Big Ten. And, I think some of it too, within the last decade plus, there's a lot of bad blood between Penn State and Iowa fans on the wrestling mats. A lot of that spills over to football and vice versa. So I think that's a factor as well. But most importantly, it's just, I've always been a firm believer you can't have a true rivalry if it's not an even series where games are close matchups. Both teams are regularly winning, and that's what you have here. Like I said, 11-11 since Penn State's joined the Big Ten in the mid-90s. Games are almost always close. One instant classic after another. So we'll see what happens Saturday night. I don't expect it to be a game that gets lopsided one way or the other. And I think if that would happen, it probably goes in Penn State's favor, just the way the teams are built and it being a whiteout and everything. But yeah, it should be another great game between these two teams.
Hawkeye fan, check your stats and take one team off of your comment there. All right, Corey, go to it.
Take two? What do you mean one team? Take two teams off. What?
We'll take Ohio State off
Iowa
of there
had
for sure
against Michigan, other than, let's see, they lost in, and I'm not ripping Hawkeye fan, but I'm just saying they lost in 2019 to Michigan, lost in 2021 to Michigan, lost in 2022 to Michigan. They've lost the last three games. I don't know. I'm just
1-16.
What?
Won the game in 16.
1-16. 1-16. Yeah. Ironically, right after they got curb stomped by Penn State. But anyways, all good points, Marty. And I'll say this. I agree with you about Iowa not getting blown out. I think there was some, you probably heard me say this, there was some concern last week when Iowa gave up some big plays through the air. And, Jamari Harris, it was his first week back at corner. And here's a good opportunity for me to admit that I was dead wrong on something. I made the comment that prior to the game, maybe it's better if Iowa sticks with Deshaun Lee at corner. He's the young corner who started in place of a suspended Jamari Harris for those first 2 weeks due to the gambling situation at Iowa. And I couldn't have been more wrong, because Jamari Harris came back, didn't play all of last year due to injury, was suspended the first two games this year, and he got picked on last week. And that's good. because he got picked on in a 41-10 rout. And it was a first quarter and a first half that Phil, no question about it, Phil Parker is going to use to their advantage. He already made huge corrections at halftime, and they were a much better team in the second half. But I just think that's going to make a world of difference. You don't want to, they're going to have confidence sending Jamari Harris out there this week because they're confident in him as a player that he's going to have learned from his mistakes. Now, you can maybe tell us about Penn State's downfield attack, Marty, because I'll be honest. I mean, the hype train for Drew Aller was strong in the offseason, but I really haven't seen a ton of Penn State football this year, partially because I just don't get to watch as much college football as I used to with kind of being honed in on Iowa. But, these games have been lopsided. Penn State's look good.
Yeah, I will say the Drew hype train, I mean, well, maybe it hit a little bit of a bump in the road against Illinois. It really hasn't slowed down. I mean, his adjusted completion percentage going into that game, so you take away drops and throwaways, was 92%. And against Illinois, he was 15 of 33, but if you take away drops and throwaways, because drops were a major problem for Penn State on Saturday, his adjusted completion percentage jumps to 66%. And, Mark, you and I talked about this a little bit last night. As much as Illinois' defense struggled against Kansas, that's still a really good defense. So you'll gladly take an adjusted completion percentage of 66% on the road in Big Ten play against a team like Illinois. And there are also 4 balls that got batted down at the line of scrimmage because Johnny Newton just looked like Aaron Donald on Saturday. And that doesn't go into that. But, yeah, Drew has been tremendous. He's been better than I think anybody could have anticipated thus far. Now, I will say if there is one major question mark about Penn State's offense, it's the receivers. They played really well against West Virginia and Delaware. Definitely took a step back against Illinois. Now, Trey Wallace, who is an important starter for them, did not play against Illinois, went through pregame warmup, so I have a hard time seeing him missing back-to-back games. He went through pregame warmups and was unable to go. But yeah, the big play, if it's going to come with this offense in the passing game, it's going to be Keandre Lambert-Smith, who started to break out from the end of the year last year, back-to-back 100-yard games against Michigan State and then in the Rose Bowl, including in the Rose Bowl, an 88-yard touchdown catch, which I think was a new Rose Bowl record. Went for well over 100 yards, almost 200 yards against West Virginia, including a 70-something yard touchdown catch on like the third play from scrimmage. And then Illinois really bottled him up. So but again, some of that I think was without Wallace playing. They were able to put a little bit more attention on him. So we'll see how it goes Saturday on that front. But yeah, Drew, for 3 games into a career as a true sophomore, you couldn't be happier if you're a Penn State fan. I think what excites you most is you knew the arm talent, and he has put that on full display, but his pre-snap reads and checks have mostly been really, really good. And that's the kind of thing that, can take some time at quarterback to master. And 3 starts in, he seems to have that down pretty well. Now, obviously, Phil Parker is a completely different animal from anything he's ever faced as a starter, as a starting quarterback. So we'll see how that goes Saturday. I'm sure they're going to try and confuse him, and it'll be a good test for him. But, yeah, so far, Drew definitely has passed the test. And like I said, the hype train maybe hit a rock or 2 on the tracks against Illinois, but I definitely don't think it's slowed down, especially on rewatch of that game.
Marty, as soon as you mentioned drop passes, I thought of Malik McLean. What is the deal with this guy? So when he played at Florida State, I didn't think I thought he was pretty average. And then he comes to Penn State, and I got to say I'm a bit surprised that he gets the time that he does. And he certainly whiffed on a few passes on Saturday. He doesn't look to me, and I've never considered him to be a Penn State starting wide receiver caliber player.
Yeah, it's strange because I think a lot of people felt that way. When Malik McLean came in, it wasn't really hidden that this wasn't a guy who was brought in impact this year. It was brought into, I think he has like 2 or 3 years of eligibility left. But then against West Virginia, he comes out as 4 catches for like 60 yards and a score. And you're like, all right, maybe you have something there. And then played well against Delaware. And then against Illinois, just 2 brutal drops. Drops are the big issue with him. He's a good route runner. He gets open. He's physical, but you got to catch the ball. Now, I will say, again, in addition, not just having Wallace back, Dante Cephas, who I know is a guy, Mark, you and I have talked about too, each week his snap count and his presence in the offense continues to increase as he gets more just adjusted to the Power 5 level, to the playbook, that sort of thing. Like I told you a few weeks ago, he was a guy who definitely could have used that spring semester, but had to go back to Kent State to finish up and graduate there. So I wouldn't be surprised to start to see more of Cephas this weekend also. But yeah, McLean is definitely an enigma because all the physical tools are there, but you got to catch the football. And those 2 drops against Illinois were brutal because they were first drive of the game, first drive of the second half. Both would have moved the sticks. Both would have allowed the offense to start to get in some rhythm. And instead, both possessions wound up 3 and outs.
I just want to make a comment real quick, and that's in regards to your comment, Marty, about Phil Parker. I made a comment earlier about the Iowa defense, and I think the lumps that could possibly help them that they took against Western Michigan. I think you'd probably say the same thing about Penn State. I didn't watch that game back. I'm going to try to watch a condensed version of it this week before I publish my preview. But, I mean, if there were things, it sounds like maybe their run defense wasn't the best. Their pass offense was up and down. I mean, that's an opportunity to get things cleaned up before a bigger game. If you can learn from mistakes in a blowout victory, what better way to learn from mistakes? you know? So I don't know if that's consistent with how you feel.
Yeah, absolutely. I said during and after the game, it's a film that Drew Allar is going to learn a lot from. He's going to burn it and never watch it again because there were a couple throws he missed. There were a couple reads that once the play started, he would kind of get on his first read, throw the ball to the guy. Not that he was like the McLean drops, for example. He was open on both of those, but if he goes to his second read, one of them, Nick Singleton, was lined up on a Mike linebacker. I don't think I need to say more about where that could have gone. And the other one, they didn't cover Nick Singleton. So those could have been 2 just massive gains had he gone through his progressions a little better. Now, the rush defense, you mentioned that. I thought they were tremendous against Illinois. Illinois, you know what Brett Bielema wants to do. He's going to line up and run it right at you. And they held Illinois to 2.1 yards per carry, which is a huge early season test for that rush defense after what happened against Michigan last year, after what happened against Illinois 2 years ago. And I think that could be big just for the confidence boost, if nothing else. But yeah, I agree. There's nothing you like more as a football coach than when you win a game handedly. And I think you saw this with some of their play calling on Saturday where they knew they were going to win the game. So they tried some things just to, like, there were opportunities there where they could have run off tackle and got huge gains in the second half when they were up 23-7, 30-7, but we're still trying to force the in-between tackle run. And I think that was more of, hey, we know we need to work on this. We're up 3 scores against an offense that can't move the ball, but they have a pretty good defense. Let's try and work on it. I mean, like you said, Corey, there's nothing you can ask more than to be able to work on things and learn from mistakes in a blowout victory. And I definitely, I didn't see any of the Iowa game. We went out to dinner after the Penn State game, so I caught like bits and pieces of it here and there because it was on one of the TVs at the bar. But from what I've gathered, it definitely seems like it was similar to where in the second half they were able to make some adjustments, pull away, and then kind of cruise and learn in a blowout victory. And like you said, you can't ask for much more than that, especially when you have this big of a game on deck. I mean.
Yeah, Ray in the chat. Penn State run D looked suspect versus Illinois. I just pulled up the stats as you said that, Marty. I mean, yeah, they hold them to 62 yards on the ground on 2.1 per carry. So
there was one carry, Reggie Love. There was a 3rd and like 26. Illinois ran a draw and got like 24 yards on it. And I mean, you don't ever want to give up 24 yards rushing, but when it's 3rd and 26, you're going to have everybody back. So you're susceptible to that because you're fine giving it up. If you take away that run, Illinois literally had like 35 yards rushing or something like that. So, and the Penn State fans are saying this too. I don't know if like I just watched a different game than some people. Or some
I'm looking at the stats.
Yeah,
stats don't lie.
I think some people were just coming into the year expected this rush defense to struggle to where on Illinois' first drive, they moved the ball, missed a field goal, and they couldn't move the ball the rest of the game. Where it's like, oh, man, they had 2 good runs on the opening drive. The rush defense is terrible. I don't know. Like you said, the stat sheet, what I watched in the game, I think they had like 12 tackles for loss. Like it told me the run defense was pretty good. So
maybe it fooled a bunch of us, Marty, because I did an analysis after the game, and I watched all the meaningful plays in the game all the way up until like 23-7, 30-7, and I checked out after that. But I watched everything. And when I went back to the opening drive, because it just seemed Illinois marched down the field, then they bogged down, then they missed the field goal. And I thought, they're running the ball down their throats. I went back to it and it was like a 12-yard run and a 5-yard run. And that was about it. And I thought, okay, well, it wasn't quite what I remembered.
Well, keep in mind I'm just looking at this because I didn't watch it yet, but the 2 Illinois quarterbacks went 7 carries for negative 14 yards. So that does, that does affect those rush numbers a little bit because of how college counts
Correct.
sacks versus
Well,
rushing.
They
some of
shouldn't.
that too was designed runs by Altmaier. I mean, again, sacks were a factor there. I think Penn State had 3 or 4 sacks on Sunday or Saturday, excuse me. But there were like 3 or 4 designed runs by Altmaier that went nowhere either. So I mean, it's a little bit of both. But yeah, I don't. If you finish a game allowing 2.1 yards per carry, you don't care how you got there. You're going to be happy with it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And Iowa, for the record, Iowa's rush defense has been solid, but they've not gotten home to the quarterback very much. And that's going to be that's the storyline was brought up today to Kirk. How did you feel the D line has played collectively? And he's happy, but the players, specifically Logan Lee today, made a comment about how we got to get home more. Teams are getting the ball out of the pocket quickly, and Iowa doesn't necessarily have. I don't know who the next AJ Epinesa, Lucas Van Ness, Drew Ott type of guy is, and that might be the one thing that makes people a little bit nervous because I don't know if they have that home run hitter defensively on the line. Maybe it ends up being Deontay Craig. There was some hype around him. He's been pretty quiet so far this year. They've got some young people on the interior of the line that I'm high on, but the run D has been solid. I mean, I obviously know you're going to be able to tell us more about the running backs for Penn State than I can, but they were just raved about today during media availability. Mark, maybe you can comment on those.
Well, I'll do the layup portion of it, and then we'll have Marty take the deep dive. Because when you're talking about 2 freshman running backs running for nearly 1,000 yards in the Big Ten, these two, Katron Allen, who was the lesser known, lesser publicized coming into his collegiate career, and of course Nick Singleton was arguably the best running back coming out of high school football. And then you just expect that leap in growth from a freshman to sophomore season. So sky's the limit for these two guys.
Yeah, and I think one thing, if you're a Penn State fan, that, on one hand can be frustrating, on the other hand has to have you excited, is Nick Singleton's due. He has not had a long run yet. We saw it time and time again last year. At one point, it seemed like it was every week he was ripping off at least 1 30, 40, 50-yard run. He hasn't had one yet. And whiteouts are a different animal. These things happen in whiteouts where even against a good defense, we've seen it against Michigan plenty of times. We've seen it against Ohio State where just there's that slightest little hole and you hit it and the crowd starts going and it's off to the races. So, Katron Allen, it's not taking away from Allen because Allen is a very good back. Like Allen is going to be a very good NFL running back for a long time, but he doesn't have that home run threat that Nick Singleton does. And Allen is just going to consistently give you 5-6 yards per carry. His greatest asset is his ability to use his vision, use his jump cuts. His jump cuts are things of beauty and make defenders miss and go. But yeah, I feel like Nick Singleton is due for one, and I'm not going to be surprised if he gets it this weekend, especially in this atmosphere in front of this crowd. As of now, the weather forecast for Saturday night, it depends where you look. Some places say it's fine. Some other places here locally are saying maybe up to half an inch to an inch of rain throughout the day on Saturday into Saturday night. So obviously, if that happens, the running attacks become even more important. But yeah, I feel like Nick Singleton is due for one. And just knowing the nature of a whiteout crowd, I'm not going to be surprised if he gets it this Saturday because these running backs have been good this year. Don't get me wrong, but I feel like they've almost felt like a disappointment, whether they have been or not. I think that's just because expectations were so high coming into the year. And you get the feeling as a Penn State, just someone who watches this team, a fan of it, covers it, whatever it is, that they're due this Saturday for at least one big run of some sort, probably from Singleton.
I still think Iowa wants this to be a mud bath.
Exactly.
I think if that happens,
that's a weather forecast for Iowa.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Even though, and I'm not saying you imply it otherwise, Marty, but even though maybe we have more confidence, maybe considerably more confidence in the Michigan rush offense, and we could bring up too, Mark, that Kirk was pretty clear today that Iowa's top 2 backs are out this week in Caleb Johnson and Jazz Patterson. So LaShawn Williams, who went off last week, he's going to be the workhorse, and then they got a couple of true freshmen back there, and Kamari Moulton and Terrell Washington. That is the running back room. That's how quickly, a developmental program like Iowa, I mean, you can go from a solid room, a couple guys go down with lower leg injuries, and now you're playing true freshmen. So, yeah, that's a concern. But I'd still take rain. I'd take rain and mud and slop and sliding around and whatever the case may be. It seems like this game is always rainy. Does it rain every single week on Saturdays at Happy Valley?
It really does. And it seems like when Iowa comes to town, like that 2008 game, it rained. 2016, if I remember correctly, it rained. The 2018 game, the weather was just horrific. Like, it's just, I swear when Penn State and Iowa play, the football gods are determined to just have it be a slop fest. And like the joke amongst Penn State people is that it's a law. When Penn State and Iowa play, there has to be at least one safety. There just has to be. Like, it's just, there always is.
In 20, wasn't there in 20? I'm just reflecting as you're saying this, Marty. 2019, 2020 was one of my favorite. Like, it's one of my favorite games to go back and watch. Isn't that weird? Because Iowa lost that game, Mark. But it's one of my favorite games to go back and watch highlights because it was an odd, bizarre.
It was so weird.
Game.
Yeah.
You had two Penn State snaps go over the head of was it on punts?
Were they on punts? Yeah, and they went flying out of the back of the end zone.
Flying out of the back of the end zone. They gave him 4 points.
Is that the game Iowa had a chance late and Nathan Stanley threw a pick?
Yeah.
On a by the way, the end zone.
And that was a play where an Iowa coach. There's a different view of that play from the stands, where an Iowa coach is yelling for a timeout, and the ref did not see it. Had he called,
they had somebody lined up wrong, and Stanley threw the ball, and literally Nick Scott was the only person standing there.
Stanley panicked, and it was a bad look for him, bad moment for him. He had another play earlier in the game where they had actually, we talk about Iowa not taking advantage of waste downs, Mark. I think it was a waste down. And they went play action, and they had TJ Hawkinson. I mean, nobody. I mean, you could have trotted in backwards with as much room as TJ Hawkinson had, and Nate Stanley just airmailed him. And there was a couple times I remember in that game they zoomed the camera in on Nate, and he just looked like a deer in the headlights. And he busted up his thumb. That's the other thing you got to remember. He busted up his thumb on a teammate's helmet during that game. He struggled to throw the ball all game. Then all of a sudden, second to last drive of the game, he's throwing darts to Noah Fant and to TJ Hawkinson, and Mekhi Sargent's running all over the field. So, yeah, this game always seems to be rainy. 2009, I mean, that's the ultimate rain-affected game, I guess you could say. Marty, you weren't covering the beat in 2009. Do you remember that game?
Oh, I remember it very fondly. The first or second snap from scrimmage, Derek Williams takes it 80 yards or whatever it was. Yeah. White out crowd, they're pumped up. I'm thinking, all right, here we go. And that was another game. That was a revenge factor for Penn State, because in 2008, had they beaten Iowa at Kinnick, they would have played for the national championship. And I think, the crowd was jacked up. The team was ready to go. First play, long touchdown. You're thinking, here we go. And then they kind of flatlined, and then Adrian Claiborne blocked that punt, and Penn State literally just did nothing the rest of the game. It was a frustrating one.
That Adrian Claiborne blocked punt, it's become so iconic with Iowa fans. But Mark, this is maybe going to sound like hyperbole. It's one of the greatest single individual plays in Hawkeye history. I mean, just how he just blew up I don't know who was supposed to be blocking him, but the dude was about half his size, and he just blew right through him. And then the sound, everybody talks about the sound. Tom Kakert has brought this up on my show, the sound from the press box that he could hear, and that football hitting Adrian Claiborne's arms. And then the dude, Adrian, it's rainy out. The ball bounces. He picks it up in stride and takes it into the end zone. I mean, just talk about an athletic, impressive play. And that changed the game, and Iowa won narrowly. Coach Don Patterson, who is on the postgame show with me each and every Saturday, he made the comment the other day, Marty. We were talking about Iowa's average, because that's become a talk around the country, Iowa's points per game average. And if Iowa's going to stay at 25 points per game after this week, they have to score 15 this week. And he asked me, he said, do you think that's going to be enough? And I said, what? 15 points? So you think that's going to be enough? But honestly, if you look at history, 2017, 2019, 2018. I don't remember exact scores on these games. Certainly 2009. Mark, you're a better person for scores, but all those games hovered in the teens, and in the fourth quarter. So if you've got 15 in the fourth, you probably have a shot on Saturday.
And again, that's what Iowa does. Like you're talking some really good Penn State offenses there. Trace McSorley, Saquon Barkley, KJ Hamler, Chris Godwin, Deshaun Hamilton, some of the best skill players, quarterbacks, running backs, Miles Sanders in program history. And Iowa they drag you down in the mud, and again, if that rain comes Saturday, I'm with you. I don't want it to, because that's going to favor Iowa, because I think probably the biggest advantage Penn State has in this game is the athleticism advantage. both offensively and defensively. And, if it's pouring down rain, it's going to be harder for Keandre Lambert-Smith to get behind defensive backs. If Theo Johnson, Tyler Warren, the tight ends are running seam routes and open in the middle of the field, if it's pouring down rain, it's going to be harder for Lar to hit that throw. It's going to be harder for them to catch the ball. Defensively, this Penn State defense is as fast as any I've ever seen. It's as fast and athletic as any I've ever seen at Penn State. But if it's pouring down rain, you could come off the edge with a full head of steam and break down to make a sack or make a tackle for a loss and just fall. Those things are going to happen if the weather's that bad. So, but yeah, like you said, that's what Iowa does. Iowa's going to drag you down in the mud and keep it low scoring. So I wouldn't be surprised if Iowa's got 15 points in the fourth quarter, and that's enough either to have them in the lead or within striking distance, because it's just, again, that's what Iowa does. I think that's what makes Iowa as an opposing fan so just frustrating, or whatever you want to put on it, because you might not give up a defensive touchdown and still very well lose because it's Iowa. They're going to kick 3 field goals, get a safety, have a pick 6, and you look up and with 2 minutes to go, you're losing 18-14 with a 4th and 10. You've got to get it.
Mark, is it, you think it's just a coincidence? Well, obviously it is, but Ontario Thompson on Saturday, big, 6'3", 300-pound defensive lineman, got a blocked punt Saturday against Western Michigan that went into the back of the end zone and ended up being a safety. Maybe that's a sign we're going to have more special teams oddities and theatrics this week. Can I just say real quick, another thing about that 2018 game? Sam Brinks, Iowa defensive end, caught a touchdown pass on a
fake field goal.
Fake field goal. Mark, Iowa ran a fake field goal, and the Iowa punter threw just a dime. I mean, just a beauty over the shoulder, and this this defensive lineman catches it over good coverage in the end zone. It was just weird. That 2017 to 2018, Iowa ran a bunch of fake plays, and they all worked, and then they just kind of stopped running them. So we'll see. Maybe LeVar Woods will pull one out of the hat this weekend.
Yeah, that Penn State defense, my good. And I know I need to tread lightly here because the Iowa folks take a lot of pride in their defense, and it's been arguably the best defense, and sometimes clearly the best defense in the Big Ten at times in recent years. But sheer athleticism, and not that it's not a good defense in terms of execution, but this Penn State crew, wow. They've got athletes. They've got NFL players just all over the place, all 3 levels. I don't know why I didn't pick this team to win the Big Ten, but I didn't. But
let me just make a comment.
They've got dudes all over the place.
I'm sure you're totally right. You know a lot more about that defense than I do. Iowa's got NFL guys at every level on defense too.
Yeah.
So they may not be.
There's not as many.
Okay. I don't know that. You could be right. I have no idea. They probably have.
One thing I will say about this Penn State defense, it makes it so special. Even if you look at, this team, it's unavoidable, gets compared up and down to 2017. As part of this year, 2017 was James Franklin's best team. That 2017 team didn't have a true game record on defense. This defense has at least 1 first-round pick at every single level, and that's when you start getting into that special territory. Chop Robinson is going to be a first-round pick. Abdul Carter will be a first-round pick. Kalen King will be a first-round pick. You go back up to the defensive line, Denai Dennis Sutton will probably be a first-round pick when the time comes. This team, it's not just that they're loaded with NFL guys. They're loaded with legitimate first-round, second-round, 5-10-year stalwart kind of guys. And just you don't get that very often in college football if you're not in Alabama, you're not in Georgia. Even Ohio State doesn't have a lot in their defense. And some of it is good recruiting wins. Some of it has been great development by Manny Diaz and the staff. Some of it is just these guys fit Manny Diaz's scheme perfectly. But I think that's, with me at least, that's what makes this defense the potential to be so special. It's not that they've got NFL guys at every level, but they've got at least 1 first-round pick at every single level, potentially multiple first-round picks in the defensive end room.
And I'll just say, too, a couple observations from the stat sheet when I look through Penn State, Illinois. Penn State took care of the ball, but when you only win by 17 and you're +5 in turnovers, that tells me maybe not quite as dominant as the score would indicate. And you look at a couple other stats here, Marty. 20 first downs for Penn State, 20 first downs for Illinois. Illinois did outpass Penn State. Now they're playing from behind, so that needs to be put in context. 7 penalties for 70 yards for the Nittany Lions. Iowa's had 1 penalty in 2 weeks now. So those are some areas there. You got to win the turnover battle.
Yeah.
And Don Patterson said it first. He said it best on Saturday. You got to win the turnover battle if you're going to have a chance on the road in state college, especially at night with the whiteout. And I mean, has Drew Aller, obviously didn't last week, but has he shown any propensity to turn the ball over so far?
There's some throws he's made where people are like, man, you're lucky that I didn't get picked off, but you have to take into consideration his arm talent. There's throws he can make that 99% of quarterbacks, it's going to be intercepted, but he's got the ability to thread that needle like a lot of quarterbacks don't. So I don't worry about that. You know, you mentioned things on Saturday. Their biggest problem was their offense executed extremely poorly. Not just the drops, the biggest penalty in that game. They were up 13-0, had a 3rd and 1 at the Illinois 15, well on their way to make it 20-0 and probably just run away with it. Keandre Lambert-Smith got called for a late hit, backed them up 15 yards, incomplete pass, blocked field goal, and Illinois went down and scored. So they've got to execute better. They've got to clean those things up. And again, this is where, and you said it yourself, with Illinois playing from behind, it can be tough reading the stat sheet. Illinois, their last 2 possessions, which was their starting offense against a lot of threes and a decent amount of walk-ons running around on the field, is when they put up a lot of yards. They had to have had over 100 yards combined between those 2 drives. And again, I mean, should you stop that as a defense? Absolutely. But whenever you have your 3rd stringers, walk-ons, true freshmen out there against the starting offense from the Big Ten, you're going to expect to give up some yards. So, but again, you said it yourself. When you look at just the box score, knowing one team was losing by 20 plus, they're going to have more yards passing just because you're going to throw the ball more.
You wonder if James Franklin has put it in Drew Aller's head about Iowa's propensity to create turnovers. I wonder if he dares put that in his head as a cautionary note to say, this team's a little bit different here.
I wouldn't do that.
Or you just don't want to put that in his head, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, that's where I'm at. Like, hey, you know what? You've got a special arm. You've got as much arm talent as any quarterback in the country other than Caleb Williams. Like, go play ball. You make a mistake, whatever, shake it off. You'll get him next time. I think that would be, at least to me, is someone who firmly believes when it comes to sports is just as much mental as it is physical. I wouldn't even want to plant that seed.
Mark, do you agree with that assessment that Drew Aller has as much arm talent as anyone but Caleb Williams?
I do think that Caleb Williams is above everyone else. I just think it's not even a debate. But Drew Aller has a ton of football to play, of course. You know, the first time he played a meaningful, well, it would have been the first time he ever played, was the Purdue game.
Yes.
The opener last. He whistled one. He came in. He whistled a throw to the sideline. I was like, man, that's fluid. That's smooth. He just flicked it and spun an out route. Yeah, it's hard for me to. I haven't watched him. The West Virginia game I had an eye on, but I wasn't really dissecting it. I did watch this game and was not a great performance, of course. It was uneven against Illinois. I did watch this game. Yeah, I think, I made the statement and Corey and I got into it about whether you would take Cade McNamara or you would take Kyle McCord or Drew Aller. And I said, we had that conversation in the off season, right? Am I not framing this correctly?
A little bit out of context.
In what way?
Go ahead.
No, I want to make sure I'm saying this accurately, but I thought that you said, who would you take or who's better? And you said who's better? And I said, I'd take either McCord or Aller over Cade McNamara just based on sheer ability.
First of all, that conversation was, thank you for acknowledging, it was prior to the season starting.
Yeah.
I was commenting on a top 5 quarterback list from Fox or from Pro Football Focus or one of those social media networks profiles. And they had like Aller, Kyle McCord, Tanner Mordecai, Hudson. They had like a bunch of unknown guys who are not unknowns, but I mean, guys who haven't proven anything at their respective schools ahead of a guy in Cade McNamara who's been to a college football playoff and won a Big Ten championship. And so I just said, if you're looking at getting a proven guy, there were question marks about McCord and Aller heading into the year. Now, maybe you disagree with that, Mark, but they hadn't really, frankly, there were question marks about Hudson Card at Purdue.
No, I didn't disagree with there being question marks. If somebody didn't play, then there are question marks. Bryce Young, I had the confidence to rank him second in the country leading into a season in which he had only thrown like 5 passes the year before in garbage time, but I still had the confidence that he was going to be the one of the best quarterbacks in the country. Same thing with Aller. I would just say I'd flat out take him.
I also made the comment that I think we both agreed on that Cade McNamara is the ideal quarterback for the situation at Iowa.
Sure.
Not that Drew Aller couldn't perform well with this team and Kyle McCord, but it's just a totally different animal. Now, here's something we haven't talked about. Last few minutes of the show, we should probably acknowledge Cade McNamara didn't play very well on Saturday. He hasn't played great these last 2 weeks. He's still dealing with an injury. And I did make the comment on Saturday that I wish they had sat him. And I said it prior to the game. I wish they'd shut him down for a week. I'm not on the medical staff. I don't know if that's the right opinion to have, but it is my opinion based on the fact that I saw him scramble one time on Saturday and he's wincing and grimacing following an 8-yard run. That frustrates me because don't convince me you're not going to be able to convince me for a second that Iowa couldn't have won that game on Saturday, that they won 41-10 with Deacon Hill or Joe Labus. Again, Cade didn't play that well, threw 2 picks actually. So, hindsight's 2020. We said it before. Obviously, I'm sure they thought about that. They had that consideration in mind. They decided not to do that. Perhaps that will help him in the long run. Maybe people keep telling me that he needs to gain chemistry with his receivers. I just hate to think of another CJ Beathard situation back in 2016, Mark, where he's just hampered all year long. So that's a little bit worrisome, but I still have a lot of faith in Cade McNamara based on everything we've talked about in the past. I thought he played pretty well in week 1, but he hasn't really been tested either. He hasn't needed to put on any really strong level of performance through the year. Maybe he will on Saturday, but if it starts raining, like Marty said, you're probably going to see a heavy ground attack, and then it's a matter of ball security with a couple freshman backs with a slippery ball and all that stuff. But the quarterback battle will be an interesting one because he has went there and won. Let's not forget that, Marty. Cade and Eric all have both been in Happy Valley for a whiteout and won. And if I'm not mistaken, Drew Aller's never played in a whiteout. Am I correct in saying that?
Well, no, Drew played in the whiteout quite a bit last year because they just absolutely curb stomped Minnesota. So Drew got almost the entire second half. Now, obviously, starting in it and facing Iowa are 2 different animals. And, I guess I shouldn't diss Minnesota too bad because Joe Rossi is one hell of a defensive coordinator himself. But that Minnesota team couldn't throw the ball. So they made things pretty easy on them last year. But yeah, you mentioned Cade and Eric Hall in what was that, 2021, where now that is a game that quite honestly Penn State should have won with like 5 minutes to go, maybe less than that, and the game tied. They forced a strip sack on McNamara. They recovered it like the Michigan 8 and could not do anything at that point, had to kick a field goal. And then Michigan went down and scored because Kalen King, who was a freshman at the time, got crossed up in coverage and ran into a linebacker and left Eric Hall wide open to walk in for a go-ahead touchdown. But I agree that matters, that the fact that Cade McNamara has started at Beaver Stadium before. Now, that was also a noon kick, so obviously a totally different animal than Beaver Stadium at night. But, yeah, I think if McNamara, and I was wondering about that because I knew he got hurt preseason. So if McNamara has any sort of injury, I will be curious to see how that plays out Saturday because this Penn State defense, I know they haven't gotten a ton of sacks this year, but a lot of it has been, they going into the Illinois game, they'd only faced, I think, like 40 pass attempts all year, which is a testament to the defensive end room and the cornerbacks. And B, teams, are looking to get rid of the ball quickly because this defensive end room is probably the best in the Big Ten. So I think that's as much of a factor as anything. That said, they have been hurrying, pressuring, and hitting quarterbacks pretty frequently. And we saw that Saturday. Early in the second quarter, Luke Altmaier got just blown up on a play by defensive end Amin Vanover and just was never the same the rest of the game. And if Cade McNamara is coming into this potentially banged up already, that's football. You can call it dirty, you can call you what it want. If you're on a defense and that quarterback's already in pain, you're going to take every shot you can get, whether it's a quarterback, running back, whatever it is, because you're going to want to, make it even more difficult on them. So we'll see what happens. And just because we were talking about it, I pulled up the weather real fast. The most recent they have for AccuWeather out of state college is the 60% chance of rain Saturday night. So it's how much they're going to get, I don't know, but it definitely seems to be, as we get later in the week, trending more and more towards there being some rain, at least at some point during that game. So that definitely could be the great equalizer for Iowa.
And the forecast that I looked at said the same. And Marty, it said that a greater chance of rain in the evening than in the morning.
Yes,
So
as the day goes on, the chance of rain increases. Which, again, if you're Iowa, that's probably what you want to see. 7:30 kickoff. It doesn't matter. And this is not just an Iowa thing. If Penn State was playing Ohio State this Saturday, I'd say the same thing. As Ohio State athletes are a little bit better, you want that rain to kind of slow those things down. It can be the great neutralizer. As a Penn State fan, I go back to the 2009 Citrus Bowl where LSU just had freaks all over the field, and they played in a mud bowl, and LSU literally could not do anything. And Penn State won a game they probably shouldn't have won, with the weather being a big factor. It's a real thing.
Mark?
Well, Erica's got a question. We're going to wrap up here soon, but want to honor this super chat. So, Erica, thank you so much for that. If our defense gets to the Penn State quarterback, we win. I think Joe Evans is going to get to him. How is Penn State's special teams?
I know, Mark, you and I talked about this a little bit last night. It has been probably the biggest pleasant surprise on this team because there was a lot of concern about kicker coming in. And then in the first half against West Virginia, Sanders Sahadak missed 2 field goals from inside of 30 yards. And it was just like, oh, God, here we go. And then in the second half of that game, Alex Falcons took over. Falcons did not miss an extra point. The only field goal he missed was blocked, and it was a 50-plus yarder. So, low trajectory, it's more likely to be blocked. Johnny Newton blocked it again. Johnny Newton looked like Aaron Donald on Saturday. But yeah, I think if you're a Penn State fan, you feel a lot better about the special teams now than coming into the year, especially the way Falcons have been able to settle things down. Hit a 45-yard kick on Saturday, which is big on the road in Big Ten play. Caden Saunders has been a sneaky good punt returner. Nick Singleton's the kicker returner, and anytime Singleton touches the ball, he can score. And their coverage teams are great. That wasn't the concern. You were worried about their kicking, and their kicking has been way above and beyond. Even if you had high expectations coming into the year, the kicking situation, you'd still be pleased with it. The fact people came in expecting potential disaster, you've got to be ecstatic with what you've gotten from special teams so far.
It should be noted as well, Mark, that Kirk unfortunately confirmed today that it looks like Luke Lachey is out for the season. So that's a blow. I feel terrible for Luke. Just to, when you see a guy go down that early in the year, we can talk about the play he went down on. He went down against Western Michigan. He was potentially on track to be another highly touted NFL Iowa tight end. He was having a really good start. He really impressed me through 2.5 games. And keep in mind, those 2.5 games were against Utah State, Iowa State, and Western Michigan. So he was going to have a big year. The good news is they have a lot of depth at tight end. And Mark, we talked about it heading into the season that was their deepest room. This is where it helps you. I mean, now you got Eric All as your number one tight end. You've got Addison Estringa, and you've got Steven Stilianos. They're high on all 3 of those guys. So they can deal with it. It's unfortunate. It hurts them, no question. They're down 2 of their best backs in Caleb Johnson and Jazz Patterson. But again, deeper there than they have been. They've got another guy in LaShawn Williams who was in competition for the RB1 spot heading into the year. So if he can stay healthy, and they're going to have to mix in this true freshman, Terrell Washington Jr. and Kamari Moulton, they can deal with it. I'm not freaking out about the injuries. It's unfortunate. Like I said, they've stayed relatively healthy up to this point, but football injuries are a part of football. So I don't want to hear any excuses about anything at this point. If they lose Saturday, it's because they got outplayed or whatever the case may be. But injuries are a part of football. Those are facts. Those guys are down. And Andy in the chat brings up Johnny Pascuzzi as well. Maybe I need to mention him. He's the 4th guy who has played at tight end, a walk-on from Des Moines, from Kansas City. And I guess fans care about this stuff too. I know you don't, Mark, but fans care about it. Certainly the players care about it. It was teased yesterday, confirmed today by Iowa Athletics. Iowa will be wearing black bottoms on Saturday. So apparently, because Logan Lee was asked about it today during availability, the Leadership Council tried to push for a uniform. They always want to do these alternate uniforms and all that. And they were pushing for all whites, I guess. And I'm thinking, why would you push for – maybe I misunderstood them. Why would you push for all whites for a whiteout? I thought the black bottoms, because like people have wanted that for a while. You're going to wear the white tops, the black bottoms at Penn State for a while. It's actually pretty clever because they always wear the white tops and the gold bottoms. So it's going to be the black pants for Saturday to kind of counteract the Penn State white, and so that'll be a little intricacy to follow as well.
Who said I don't care about uniforms?
Well, you don't care about game day. You don't care about uniform.
I don't care about game day. Yeah, where a TV show sets up their show. I always thought that was the most ridiculous thing.
Have you published videos on uniforms ever?
No.
Maybe you should start doing that.
Maybe I should.
Have your guy you should need to make a segment based on this 60-second clip about the alternate uniforms. Maybe it'll break out. Maybe it'll break out.
It might do that. Marty Leap, Penn State Rivals. Get on over there. Check out Marty's work on the Rivals site for Penn State athletics. Marty, we appreciate you hanging out with us.
Absolutely. Anytime, guys.
All right. Good stuff. And in Marty's absence, we'll pull up the other super chat. What do we have here? We've got Stephen Light saying 110,000 plus fans waiting for the Iowa Rat Smellers in Happy Valley on Saturday night. White out, sold out.
Dun, 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 dun. Right, Mark? You're not gonna get flagged for that I just did that little jingle, are you? Is this video gonna get demonetized because I just did that?
Who knows? This intelligence out there is pretty sharp. All right, it should be a good one. Iowa's like a 13-point underdog. I think that's a little heavy. I think that's severely heavy, but Vegas is usually on it one way or the other. But man, I always like, I think I made the comment to you. I like the other team when Iowa's got a large point spread in their favor. And then I like Iowa when they're getting a decent amount of points typically.
The rain will move that back down is my guess as we approach kickoff. Because I do think that how do you count on a high scoring game when's the last time, I'm sure it happens, but I think more often than not, if it's raining and it's bad weather, you're going to have lower scores.
Yeah.
Not to mention when I was involved on both sides when I was involved.
The only place that I can think of besides somebody, see, it's different than having a slick field that's still kind of manageable by the offense. And of course, the old adage, the offense knows where it's going and the defense doesn't. They've got to react. That you have maybe some guys slipping and wide receivers are open. But when it's just this plodding mud, then it slows everybody's speed down, slows down pass rushers, though, as well. But yeah, difficult to hang on to the ball, hold the ball, all that.
Yeah, just for the record, in case anybody was wondering, I did pull up. Let me just make sure I have the right. So Marty mentioned his forecast. He said like 60% chance of rain on Saturday night, and according to the Weather Channel, 60 about 56 degree, 60 degrees around 60 on kickoff. Chance of rain 60%. Maybe he was looking at the same one, and I don't see any forecast about storms. It's all just showers. So one thing we didn't mention this past week, Iowa did have another lightning delay. Seems like they get these now every year. But I guess if that happens somehow, advantage Iowa because they've been through it recently. But I don't think that's going to happen. It's probably just going to be a rainy day. And ain't stopping for the rain. They're not going to stop this game for rain.
I do a poor job sometimes promoting our offerings here at the Voice of College Football, and in particular this show. So folks, bring a friend or 5 or 10 with you next week. We'll be back here to review the Penn State game, of course, and move on from there through the Big Ten schedule for the Hawkeyes in their hopes of going to 4-0 with what would be, of course, an enormous win to get started in the Big Ten. Also, keep in mind that if you want to listen to the audio version of this, you can go to your favorite audio platform, whether that be Apple, Google Play, anything else out there, Corey?
Yeah, Apple, Google Play, Amazon, Spotify, all those.
from the Hawkeye of the Storm and check out the audio of this show and everything Corey's got available there. And of course, the stop here on YouTube is at From the Hawkeye of the Storm as Corey takes us on through the week toward the Penn State game and for post game with Coach Don Patterson.
And Mark, before we conclude, you did get one. I think we missed one super chat there that just came in a couple of minutes ago. Maybe.
Yes, I did. That would be Stephen coming back with good show, guys. Thank you so much for that, Stephen. Appreciate you. And again, you can help us build and grow the channel just simply by getting the word out there. So consider this. You've got social media influence, each one of you, that we don't have. There are folks out there that don't know about Corey's channel, don't know about our show here. And so please let folks know that we talk Iowa football each Tuesday with all of you at 4:30 Central.
Now, my keychain, I've got my little Voice of College Football keychain. So there's another way you can
promote.
Oh, yeah. I like that little keychain.
I appreciate that.
You got that little way of promoting, and you flash it to your mechanic or whoever you're handing your keys over to, and always spreading the good word, Mark.
Well done out of you. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. All right, folks, we'll see you back here on Tuesday. Enjoy the game on Saturday night.